Clarissa Ashford pressed herself flat against that cold parlor wall and listened to her own father sell her like a lame horse at auction. And she did not cry. She had run out of tears the year she understood what unmarriageable truly meant in a world that punished a woman for thinking. The stranger her father was bargaining with said nothing for a long, terrible moment. And somehow, that silence frightened her more than any words ever had. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel. Drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We want to see just how far this story travels. The voices came through the wall clear as church bells, and Clarissa Ashford stopped moving the moment she heard her own name spoken like an apology. "She ain't manageable, Westwood. I'll not deceive you on that point." Her father's voice carried the particular exhaustion of a man who had been losing for a very long time. "She reads everything she can get her hands on. She argues with ministers. She told Reverend Calloway last spring, in front of the whole congregation, that his sermon on female obedience was built on a misreading of Scripture." Was she right? The stranger's voice was low, unhurried. It landed flat and certain, the way a boot lands on solid ground. Her father sputtered. Whether she was right is hardly the... Was she right, Ashford? Silence. Long enough that Clarissa felt her breath go shallow against the wall. "Yes," her father admitted finally. "God help me, she was." "Then she is not the problem," said the man called Westwood. "The congregation is." Clarissa did not move. She stood in the dark hallway with her hand pressed flat against the plaster, and her heart doing something she did not have a proper name for. She was 26 years old. She had heard herself discussed like a broken piece of furniture before, in church pews, across dinner tables, in parlors where women smiled at her face and shredded her reputation the moment she turned her back. She had learned to hold her chin up through all of it. But she had never heard a stranger defend her. Not once in 26 years. "You understand what you are asking for," her father continued, voice dropping low like a man confessing sin. "Every family of standing in this county has declined. The Hargroves, the Daltons, the Mercer boy, God bless him, lasted one dinner conversation before he told his mother she was too much. 26 years old, Westwood, and not a single offer. The whispers have stopped being quiet. People say she's proud, difficult, that no decent household could manage her." "I did not come here looking for something manageable," Westwood said. "Then what in God's name did you come here looking for?" A pause, longer than the first. "A woman with a spine," said Westwood. "The world has plenty of the other kind." Clarissa waited until she heard the study door click shut before she let herself breathe. She went back upstairs, sat on the edge of her bed in the dark, and did not allow herself to feel a single thing. That was the skill she had perfected across 26 years. The quiet, controlled act of absorbing whatever the world aimed at her without flinching. "A woman with a spine," he had said. She turned the phrase over in her mind like a coin she wasn't certain was real. Nathaniel Westwood. She had heard the name once before, 3 weeks ago, when Mrs. Hargrove had mentioned in passing that a gentleman from the Carolina Territories had arrived in the county and taken up residence at Thornfield, the old Mercer property at the far edge of town. Nobody knew much about him. He had money, that was plain. He had manners, that was plain too. But where he had come from, what family had shaped him, what his history was, none of that was plain at all. The man existed in Virginia the way a stone existed in a riverbed, solidly present, entirely unexplained. And now he was sitting in her father's study, discussing her like a transaction. She told herself she would not stand for it. She told herself she would walk into that study and say exactly what she thought. She sat on the edge of her bed for 2 hours and did neither, because beneath the anger lived the ugly truth she had been refusing to look at for 3 full seasons. Her father's debts had long since stopped being manageable. She knew it. She had found the letters, every last one, and she had read them all. The creditors were no longer polite. The house would follow the land, and then would come the moment that frightened her more than any whispered insult. The moment her younger sisters looked at her and understood that their ruin was, in part, her fault. That she had been too proud, too sharp, too unwilling to become smaller for the right man's comfort. She could not let that happen. She rose from the bed, smoothed her dress with steady hands, and walked downstairs. The study door stood open. Her father had moved to the window with his back to the room, and Nathaniel Westwood sat in the chair across the desk, with one leg crossed over the other, and a stillness about him that Clarissa found immediately unsettling. He looked up when she entered. He did not stand. He simply looked at her with dark, level eyes and waited. Her father spun around. "Clarissa, you should be—" "I was not asleep," she said. "I haven't slept properly in 3 months." She looked at the stranger without blinking. "I assume you are Mr. Westwood?" "I am," he said. "And you want to marry me?" "I've expressed interest in discussing the possibility." "Discussing," she repeated, "as though I am a parcel of land being considered at auction." Her father made a strangled sound. "Clarissa, for the love of—" "It is an honest observation, father." She kept her eyes on Westwood. He had not flinched. She found that interesting. Most men flinched. Why me? There are women in this county with better reputations, smoother manners, more agreeable temperaments. Women who will not argue with you at the breakfast table. Why come to a house with a ruined daughter when you could walk into any parlor in Virginia and have your pick? Westwood studied her for a long moment. "Because I have been in a great many parlors, Miss Ashford, and every pick available in them would drive me to an early grave within the year." Something shifted in her chest. She did not let it show. "That is not an answer," she said. "It is the most honest one I have." He tilted his head just slightly. "You want the practical answer?" "I want the true one." "Then sit down." She nearly refused on principle, but she sat. He leaned forward, elbows on the arms of the chair, hands loosely clasped. "My business affairs require I establish a permanent household in Virginia. A man without a wife is seen as transient, uncommitted, a flight risk in property negotiations. I need a wife the way some men need a signature on a contract. Not for affection, not for companionship, for legitimacy." He paused. "Your father needs capital the way a drowning man needs air. The arrangement suits both parties." The room held its breath. "And me?" Clarissa said. "What does the arrangement offer me, besides the dubious honor of being your legitimizing document?" Something crossed his face, too quick to name. "A house that will not be taken from you," he said. "Security for your sisters, and a husband who will not spend his evenings trying to cure you of your opinions." She stared at him. "That is a remarkably low bar." "It is a remarkably common failure." She made him wait 3 days for her answer. She spent those 3 days reading everything she could find about Nathaniel Westwood, which amounted to almost nothing. Carolina territories, yes. Considerable money, yes. He had acquired Thornfield for cash and renovated it in a single season. Beyond that, nothing. No family on record, no traceable history, no past that anyone in this county could account for. On the fourth morning, she walked to Thornfield herself. She arrived without announcement, knocked twice, and when the housekeeper opened the door, said simply, "Tell Mr. Westwood that Miss Ashford is here with her answer." She waited in the front hall. She did not fidget. She had made her decision, and she intended to deliver it with both hands steady. Westwood appeared at the top of the stairs and descended without hurry. He stopped at the bottom and looked at her. "Miss Ashford." "Mr. Westwood?" She squared her shoulders. "I will accept your arrangement, but I have conditions." One eyebrow rose, just barely. "Of course you do. First, I will not be displayed. If you attend social engagements for the purpose of legitimacy, I will accompany you when I choose, not when commanded. Reasonable. Second, I retain full management of whatever household accounts you assign to me. I will not be handed an allowance like a child and asked to account for every ribbon and candle. Also reasonable." She hadn't expected agreement that quickly. It threw her rhythm, just slightly, but she recovered. "Third, you will not attempt to alter my reading habits, my opinions, or my manner of speaking. I am aware that I am not a conventional woman. I have no intention of becoming one." Westwood looked at her. Then he said, "Miss Ashford, if I had wanted to marry a conventional woman, I would not be standing in this hallway." She searched his face for the condescension that usually lived beneath such words, the polite tolerance, the performance of open-mindedness that men wore like a costume until the ring was on the finger. She could not find it. That made her more unsettled, not less. "And my fourth condition?" she said. "There are four." "There are four." She held his gaze directly. "I will not be lied to, about anything. If there are matters you cannot speak of, say so plainly. I can respect a closed door far more than a painted one. But I will not discover that something you told me was false. I will not tolerate deception, Mr. Westwood, not from anyone, and most certainly not from a husband." A pause. "Do we understand each other?" He looked at her for what felt like a very long time. "We do," he said. But something in the way his eyes did not quite settle when he said it, in the way his hands stilled too deliberately at his sides, sent a thread of unease through her chest that she could not name and could not shake. She pushed it down hard. She told herself she was reading too much into nothing again. That was her failing. She read too much into everything. It had cost her friendships and near proposals, and the good opinion of half the county. She would not let it cost her this. "Then we have an agreement," she said, and held out her hand. He shook it the way one man shakes another's, firmly, without ceremony, without pretense. "We do," he said again. The news spread through the county in 4 days flat. The response was exactly what Clarissa had expected and precisely what she had prepared herself for. "Westwood?" Mrs. Hargrove said, loudly, at the general store, where she knew at least 8 women were within earshot. "That mysterious man from Carolina? He is taking the Ashford girl? The difficult one?" She let a long pause do its work. "Lord have mercy! He cannot possibly know what he is getting himself into." "Or," said the younger Miss Dalton, "he has no other options." Laughter. Easy, careless laughter. Clarissa heard every syllable of it from the other side of the dry goods shelf where she was waiting for her order to be wrapped. She had 2 choices: walk away and say nothing, or turn the corner and say exactly what she thought. She turned the corner. "Mrs. Hargrove, Miss Dalton." She kept her voice pleasant as summer water. "What a fortunate coincidence! I was just thinking about what one says to people who discuss private affairs in public, as though the subject of those affairs has gone conveniently deaf." She smiled. It was not a warm smile. I will save you the indirection. Yes, I am to be married. Yes, to Mr. Westwood. I imagine that surprises you both, given how firmly this county has held to the belief that no sensible man would ever have me." Mrs. Hargrove's mouth moved. No sound came out. "It appears," Clarissa said, unhurried, "that one did." She collected her order and walked out of that store with her chin at exactly the right angle. Her hands shook the entire walk home. Nobody saw that part. That evening she sat alone on the back porch and allowed herself to think the thing she had been refusing to think for 3 days running. She was about to marry a man she did not know. A man with no traceable family, no accountable history, no past that anyone in this county could name or verify. A man who had offered her a bloodless, logical arrangement and called it a marriage. She was not sentimental. She had never allowed herself to be. Sentiment was a luxury, like silk and imported tea, available to women whose circumstances permitted it. Hers never had. But she was honest. And the honest part of her sat in the evening dark and admitted that something about Nathaniel Westwood did not add up. The money was too certain. The manner was too controlled. The way he had looked at her when she named her fourth condition, like a man recognizing something he had not been prepared to find. That was not the look of a man who simply needed a wife for property transactions. That was the look of a man being very careful about what he allowed to show. "I will not tolerate deception." "We do," he had said, and his hands had gone still. The wedding was held on the last Saturday of June, small, without ceremony, in the parlor of the Ashford house, with only her father and sisters present. Her youngest sister, Mabel, cried. Her middle sister, Frances, stood very straight and pressed Clarissa's hand twice before the minister began, which was the most emotion Frances had ever shown in a single moment. Clarissa wore pale blue. She spoke her vows in a clear, unwavering voice. Westwood spoke his with the same flat steadiness that characterized everything about him. He looked at her directly. He did not falter. When it was done and the minister stepped back, Westwood turned to face her. She looked into those dark, steady eyes and searched, as she had searched every time, for some flicker of what was really there. She found composure. She found intelligence. And beneath both of those things, she found something that looked unexpectedly, inexplicably, like relief. She did not know what to make of that. "Mrs. Westwood," he said quietly, just for her. "Mr. Westwood," she replied. That night, standing alone in the east suite of Thornfield while the last light of her wedding day faded from the window, she heard the house settle quietly around her. This stranger's house, her house now. And she thought about his hands going still, about the thing behind his eyes that looked like relief, about a man who had no history anyone could name, who had appeared in this county out of nowhere with cash in hand and a need for legitimacy that he had explained too smoothly, too quickly, too neatly. She had promised herself, and him, that she would not be deceived. She pulled that promise around her like armor. And deep beneath the careful, pragmatic woman she had built herself into across 26 difficult years, something quiet and dangerous had already taken root. Patient as a planted seed, certain as a Virginia summer, waiting for the first crack in the surface to find its way toward the light. Thornfield did not feel like a home. It felt like a well-kept secret. That was Clarissa's first clear thought on the morning after her wedding. Standing in the kitchen at dawn, before any servant had stirred, running her hand along the edge of a table that was too fine for a man who claimed to be merely a country gentleman of good fortune. The china was imported. The silver was monogrammed, not with a W. She had looked carefully. The monogram was old, deeply etched, and the letter at its center was not one she could read without better light. She filed it away. She said nothing. That was what she did now. She filed things away. Westwood appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6 in the morning, looking unsurprised to find her there, which told her he had already been awake long enough to learn where she was. He said, "You're up early, Mrs. Westwood." And she said, "I have always been up early, Mr. Westwood." And that was the whole of their first married morning. Two people circling the edges of each other like cats measuring territory. He poured his own coffee. She noted that. Most men of his apparent standing did not pour their own anything. "The housekeeper, Mrs. Pruitt, will show you the household accounts this morning," he said. "As agreed." "As agreed," she confirmed. "Is there anything you need before then?" She looked at him directly. "I need to understand what you expect of me on a daily basis. Not the legal arrangement, that is clear enough. The practical one. Do you entertain often? Do you conduct business from the house? Are there rooms I am not permitted to enter?" He looked at her over his coffee cup. "That last question is a pointed one." "I am a pointed person. You knew that before you came to my father's study." Something that might have been amusement crossed his face. Just barely. "The east wing of the second floor," he said. "My private study. I ask that you knock before entering." "I would have knocked regardless. I was raised with manners, even if the county doesn't believe it." She held his gaze. "Is that the only restriction?" "That is the only restriction." She nodded once. "Then I will need a key to the front door." He blinked. It was the first time she had seen him blink in surprise. "I beg your pardon?" "A key to the front door. It is my house now, according to the terms of our agreement. I do not intend to knock every time I return from town." She tilted her head. "Unless you have an objection." He reached into his coat pocket without a word and produced a key. Set it on the table between them. She picked it up. "Thank you." He looked at her with those unreadable dark eyes, and she would have sworn on her mother's grave, that the corner of his mouth moved. Mrs. Pruitt turned out to be a compact, serious woman of about 50, who had managed Thornfield for the 8 months since Westwood's arrival, and who regarded Clarissa's appearance in the household with the careful neutrality of a woman who had learned that new mistresses were best assessed before opinion was formed. She handed over the household accounts without comment. Clarissa spent 2 hours with them at the dining room table and came away with 3 things she had not expected. First, the accounts were immaculate. Not merely organized, immaculate. Every entry precise, every figure reconciled, every expenditure noted with a brevity that suggested a man who had been keeping his own books for a very long time and had no patience for error. Second, the staff wages were generous, significantly above what comparable households in the county paid. Not the gesture of a man performing wealth, the gesture of a man who did not consider it optional to pay people fairly. Third, there were household costs on record that did not correspond to anything she could see or account for. Quarterly disbursements to a firm in Philadelphia, under a name she did not recognize, listed simply as correspondence and legal. Regular, unvarying, and entered in Westwood's own hand rather than Mrs. Pruitt's. She closed the account book. She sat with her hands flat on the cover for a long moment. Then she carried it to his study and knocked twice. "Come in," he said. He was at the desk, writing. He looked up when she entered, and his eyes went immediately to the account book in her hands. Something shifted behind his expression. Fast, controlled. "There are quarterly disbursements here," she said, setting the book open on the desk in front of him. to a firm in Philadelphia called Harlan and Booth. They appear to be legal in nature. I need to know what they are." He looked at the entry, looked at her. "They are private legal matters." "In a household account, Mr. Westwood. Entered there for accounting purposes. They do not affect household operations." "They affect my understanding of this household's finances," she said, "which you gave me authority over. I cannot manage accounts I do not fully understand." He was quiet for a moment that went 3 beats too long. "Harlan and Booth manage certain property interests I hold in the North," he said at last. "Property that predates my arrival in Virginia and that is handled separately from our affairs here. It is not relevant to Thornfield." She looked at him steadily. "Is that the complete answer?" "It is the answer I can give you." She remembered what she had said to him before the wedding. "I can respect a closed door far more than a painted one." She had meant it. She still meant it. But standing in this study, looking at the careful control on his face, she felt the difference between a door that was honestly closed and one that had been deliberately painted to look like wall. "Very well," she said, and retrieved the book. "I will note them as recurring legal expenses and leave the line open." She walked to the door. "Mrs. Westwood," he said behind her. She stopped, did not turn. "I am not deceiving you," he said. "I am asking for time." She turned then, because that was not what she had expected him to say. His face was not open exactly, but something in it had moved. Something that had been held back was pressing forward against the surface. "Time is not the same as honesty," she said. "No," he agreed. "It is not." She left. She went to her room and sat very still for a long time. And she thought about the difference between a man who lies easily and a man who is carrying something he does not yet know how to put down. She was not certain which one he was. She was less certain than ever. June slid into July without mercy. The Virginia summer arrived with the specific cruelty of that particular season. Heavy, wet, pressing down on everything like a hand refusing to lift. Thornfield breathed through it with the patience of old timber and stone, and within its walls, 2 strangers conducted the careful negotiation of living alongside each other. They took meals together. That had been Clarissa's decision, not out of sentiment, but out of practicality. Separate meals in separate rooms was the behavior of people in open conflict, and she was not prepared to advertise any difficulty to the staff. Westwood had agreed without discussion. The meals were, at first, almost entirely silent. Then one evening at the end of the first week, she made a comment about a letter she had received from her sister Frances, something Frances had read in a Philadelphia periodical about the cultivation of wheat versus rye in mid-Atlantic soil. And Westwood put down his fork and said, "The Hessian fly infestation of 1810 changed the calculation entirely. Wheat is a liability east of the mountains now, unless you are willing to rotate the fields on a 4-year cycle." And then they argued about it for 40 minutes, until the candles burned low, and neither of them ate much of anything. And when Clarissa finally went to bed, she lay in the dark with the strange, disorienting recognition that she had enjoyed herself. She told herself it was merely the relief of competent conversation. She had been starved of it for so long that she would have been grateful to argue about crop rotation with a fence post. She very nearly believed herself. The second thing she noticed, after the monogram and the legal accounts, was that Westwood received letters she was never meant to see. Not that he hid them clumsily. He was not clumsy. But she was observant in the way only people who have been overlooked for a long time tend to be. She had learned to see what was not meant to be seen, hear what was spoken too quietly, register the things people believed had slipped past her without notice. The letters came from the north, roughly every 10 days. always by private courier, never through the ordinary post. Westwood received them in his study, and she once passed the door at the wrong moment and heard the paper unfold, heard the particular silence of a man reading something that mattered intensely and permitting nothing in his expression. She did not ask about them directly. She had promised to respect closed doors. But on the morning that a courier arrived with a letter that made Westwood's jaw go tight, and his hand gripped the envelope too hard, she set her book down in the front room and said, without looking up, "I hope it is not bad news." He stood in the hallway for a moment. "An old matter being resolved," he said. "Nothing that concerns Thornfield." "Nothing concerning Thornfield ever seems to concern you greatly," she said. "I notice it is always the things outside it that do." He looked at her. She met his eyes over the top of her book. "You are very observant, Mrs. Westwood," he said. "I have been told it is one of my less desirable qualities." "By whom?" "By every person who preferred not to be observed." Something in him went very quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of a man at ease, the tight, interior quiet of a man deciding something. Then he said, "What would you like to know?" She put the book down properly. She looked at him fully. "I want to know who you were before you came to Virginia." One breath. Two. "A man with obligations he could not resolve in the place he came from," Westwood said. "Someone who needed to step outside his own life for a time to understand what it had become." He paused. "That is the most honest answer I can give you today." "Is it the whole one?" The tightest pause yet. "No." She nodded slowly, picked up her book. "Then I will wait," she said, "for the day when it is." He stood in that hallway a moment longer than was natural, as if he were waiting for her to be angry, as if anger was what he had prepared for. Then he folded the letter into his coat and went upstairs, and she stared at the page in front of her without reading a single word. It was Mrs. Hargrove who forced the first public test. Of course it was. The woman arrived at Thornfield without invitation on a Thursday afternoon in mid-July, under the pretense of a neighborly call, trailing Miss Dalton behind her like a second blade. Clarissa received them in the front parlor with the perfect courtesy she had perfected across a lifetime of managing people who meant her harm while smiling at her face. "My dear Mrs. Westwood," said Mrs. Hargrove, settling herself with the deep satisfaction of a woman who has arranged her entrance precisely. "You look well. Marriage agrees with you." "It does," Clarissa said simply. "Will you take tea? We cannot stay long." A pause, clearly designed to communicate the opposite. "We simply wanted to call. It has been such a subject of conversation, your household. Mr. Westwood is quite the mystery to us all. Such a private gentleman. No family connections anyone can place. It is most unusual." "Mr. Westwood is a private man," Clarissa agreed pleasantly. "As am I. We are well matched in that respect." "But surely," Mrs. Hargrove leaned forward just slightly, "you yourself must have had questions before the wedding. A woman as clever as yourself, and you are clever, Clarissa. Everyone says so. You must have inquired into his history." "I inquired into everything relevant to my decision," Clarissa said. "I was satisfied with what I found." "What did you find?" The room went still. Clarissa looked at Mrs. Hargrove with the expression she had developed over 26 years for precisely this kind of moment. Not cold, not hostile, simply clear. A look that said, "I see exactly what you are doing, and I am not going to pretend otherwise." "I found a man of integrity, Mrs. Hargrove," she said. "I realize that may be disappointing." Mrs. Hargrove blinked. Miss Dalton studied the carpet. Into the silence came the sound of boots in the hallway, unhurried, deliberate. And then Westwood appeared in the parlor doorway with his coat on and his hat in hand. He took in the room in one glance, the way a man does when he has been trained to read spaces fast. His eyes went to Clarissa first, stayed there 1 second. Then he stepped inside. "Ladies," he said, "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Clarissa said. "Mrs. Hargrove and Miss Dalton were paying their respects." "And we were just leaving," said Mrs. Hargrove, rising with the abrupt efficiency of a woman who has lost her audience. She gathered herself and Miss Dalton and moved toward the door, and then, at the last possible moment, she turned back to Westwood with a smile that had too many edges. "You know, Mr. Westwood, someone in Charlottesville has been asking after you. A man named Percival Holt. He seemed to believe you might be—" She tilted her head just so. "Someone he had previously encountered in another capacity. I thought it quite strange." Westwood did not move, not one muscle. Clarissa, watching from her chair, felt the air in the room change. "Holt is mistaken," Westwood said. His voice was level, perfectly level. The voice of a man who had rehearsed this, or something like it, before. "I have not been to Charlottesville." "Of course," Mrs. Hargrove said sweetly. "I'm sure that is the explanation." And she was gone. The front door closed. Clarissa counted to 5. "Who is Percival Holt?" she asked. "No one who matters," Westwood said. "That is not what your face said 20 seconds ago." He turned to look at her. He was standing with his hat in both hands now, and for just a moment she could see past the careful surface of him to something underneath, something pressured, something that had been held under very great weight for a very long time. "Holt is a man with an interest in finding me," he said at last. "Not a friendly one. It is a complication I had hoped not to encounter in Virginia." "Is he dangerous?" A pause. "To my privacy? Yes." She stood up slowly, crossed to where he stood. She was not close enough to touch him, but close enough that she was no longer speaking across a room. "Nathaniel." First time she had used his name without the formal address. She didn't plan it. It arrived on its own. "I have kept my word. I have not pressed you. I have watched you carry whatever this is for 6 weeks, and I have said nothing, because I told you I could respect a closed door." She held his gaze. "But I need you to tell me whether I am in danger." Something in his face cracked, just slightly, just at the edges. "You are not in danger," he said. "I swear that to you." "Then what am I?" she asked. "What is my actual position in this house, in whatever you are managing? Am I your wife, or am I a wall you are hiding behind?" The silence that followed was the longest one they had yet shared. She could hear his breathing, could see the exact moment the decision moved across his face, the moment he stopped calculating and simply stood in front of her as whatever he actually was. "You are my wife," he said. "More than I intended. More than I prepared for." His voice had dropped to something she had not heard from him before, unguarded. "And you deserve an honest answer. I know that. I know it every time I look at you." His jaw tightened. "I need you to give me a little more time." She looked at him for a long, searching moment. "How much time?" "A month," he said. "Perhaps less. There are arrangements being made, things being finalized. When they are resolved, I will tell you everything. Everything, Clarissa. I give you my word." She had 4 conditions on the day they made their agreement. The 4th was the most important. "I will not tolerate deception." He had said we do. His hands had gone still. She stood in front of him now and measured every piece of what she knew against every piece she didn't. And she made the only decision her conscience would allow her. 1 month, she said. Not a day more. He exhaled. It was not a small exhale. It was the exhale of a man who had been bracing for impact and found himself still standing. "Thank you," he said. She turned to go, got 3 steps. "Clarissa." She stopped. "The crop rotation argument," he said. "You were right. About the 4-year cycle. I've been thinking about it since Tuesday." She stood with her back to him for one long, bewildered second. Then she walked out of the parlor, went upstairs to her room, and sat on the edge of the bed with the first unguarded smile she'd permitted herself in as long as she could remember. Sharp and reluctant and entirely real. She pressed her hand flat against her chest, where something warm and reckless had taken up residence without her permission. She was not sentimental. She had never allowed herself to be. But she was sitting in a stranger's house that was her house now, smiling like a fool over crop rotation. And the man downstairs had looked at her with something so raw and unfinished in his eyes that she was running out of ways to call it nothing. She was also running out of time. She could feel it, the way you can feel a storm coming before the sky shows it. Something was approaching. Something Westwood was waiting for, managing, holding at bay with both hands. She had given him a month, and the month had already started. The month did not last. It lasted 18 days. On the 18th day, Clarissa came downstairs at 7:30 in the morning and found a man she had never seen before sitting in her front parlor with a cup of tea he had helped himself to, his boots crossed at the ankle like he owned the floor beneath them. He was broad through the shoulders, well-dressed in the manner of a man performing prosperity rather than living it, and he was smiling at the doorway when she appeared, as though he had been expecting her. "Mrs. Westwood," he said, rising with a bow that had too much flourish to be genuine. "What an extraordinary pleasure! I am Percival Holt." Clarissa did not move from the doorway. She took him in, all of him, in the single measuring second she allowed herself. And what she found was a man built entirely for the impression he made, rather than the substance beneath it. She had known men like that. She did not like them. "Mr. Holt," she said, "I was not aware we had a guest." "A spontaneous call, I'm afraid." He set the teacup down. "I hope you'll forgive the informality. I have been trying to make the acquaintance of your husband for some weeks. I find he is a difficult man to reach through ordinary channels." "My husband is a private man." "Indeed he is." The smile did not move. It was the kind of smile that stayed in one place, regardless of what the eyes were doing. "That is rather what I wished to speak with him about." She heard boots on the stairs behind her before she could respond. Westwood's pace, which she had learned to recognize the way you learn the particular sound of a door in your own house. He appeared at the top of the stairs, took one look at the man in the parlor, and something in his face went completely, utterly blank. It was the most frightening thing she had ever seen him do. "Holt," he said. His voice was ordinary. His voice was fine. But his body had gone the particular still of a man who is deciding very fast how to manage the next 5 minutes. "Westwood." Holt spread his hands in a gesture of welcome that made no sense in someone else's house. Or, "I beg your pardon. I suppose in this county that is the name you are using." The air in the room turned to glass. Clarissa looked at Westwood. Westwood looked at Holt. And then Westwood descended the stairs at the same measured pace, crossed the parlor, and said, "My wife and I will show you out." "I don't think you will," Holt said pleasantly. "Not until we have had a conversation that is some time overdue. Whatever you believe you have to say to me, I believe I have a great deal to say to you." Holt's smile finally moved, thinned, sharpened, became the thing it had been all along. And I believe your wife may find it educational, unless you would prefer to tell her yourself. Now, before I do?" He tilted his head. "That seems the more honorable course, don't you think? Given how strongly she feels about honesty." The silence that followed was absolute. Clarissa turned to look at Westwood. He was looking at her, and in his face she saw the thing she had been searching for across 7 weeks of careful observation. She saw it all at once, stripped bare, undeniable. Not calculation, not management. Something that looked like a man standing at the edge of something he had been dreading, and finding it exactly as bad as he feared. "Clarissa," he said. Just her name, nothing else. It told her everything. "Tell me," she said. "Right now. You tell me." Holt took a seat with the ease of a man enjoying theater. Westwood did not sit. He stood in the center of the room, with his hands at his sides, and he looked at his wife. And he said the thing he had been carrying since before he ever arrived in Virginia. "My name is not Nathaniel Westwood," he said. "My name is Nathaniel Harland Ashby. I am the Duke of Thornhaven. My primary estates are in the north, near the Pennsylvania border, and I have held the title for 11 years. The room was completely silent. Clarissa did not move. She stood in the doorway with her hand still on the frame, and she looked at the man she had married 18 days ago under his real name. And she did not say anything, because she was doing what she always did when the ground shifted under her. She was absorbing, processing, refusing to react until she had understood. Holt filled the silence with the satisfaction of a man who had been denied it for too long. "The Duke and I have a prior business arrangement," he said. "One that he chose to abandon when he, shall we say, relocated his circumstances to Virginia under an assumed identity. Significant sums were involved. I have been looking for him for the better part of 8 months." "How much?" Clarissa asked. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. Holt blinked. He had expected something else from her. Tears, perhaps, or accusations aimed at her husband. The direct financial question threw him off his script. "I beg your pardon? How much does he owe you?" It is the relevant question, Mr. Holt. If your grievance is financial, name the figure. If it is something other than financial, name that instead. I do not deal in implications." Holt looked at her with something she recognized, the recalibration of a man who had underestimated who he was dealing with. Good. Let him recalibrate. 12,000, he said. Dollars? Dollars. She kept her face entirely neutral. $12,000 was not a figure she could absorb without effort. But she absorbed it. She turned to Westwood, to the Duke, to the man she had married and was now not certain she had ever known. "Is the debt legitimate?" Westwood met her eyes. "Yes, it is. I do not dispute the amount." A pause. "I dispute the conditions under which it was acquired." "That is a different conversation," Holt said. "It is the only conversation," Westwood said, and for the first time his voice lost its careful evenness and became something harder. The arrangement Holt is referring to was predicated on representations he made that were false. The money was invested in a land transaction that he knew had already been encumbered by prior claim. I was not the only investor he misled. I was simply the most prominent, which made me the most useful to pursue. Clarissa looked at Holt. Something shifted in his face. Fast, almost invisible. But she caught it. "Is that true?" she asked him. "The Duke's interpretation of events is it true, Mr. Holt?" Not a question. A wall. Holt's smile came back, smaller this time. You are a remarkable woman, Mrs. Westwood. It is no wonder he chose you. You will answer my question or you will leave my house, she said. Those are the two options available to you. Holt stood. He smoothed his coat with the deliberate movements of a man buying time. I have documentation, he said. The debt is recorded and legally established. The Duke's claims about the transaction's circumstances are his own, and are not supported by any record I am aware of. He picked up his hat from the side table. I will return in 1 week with my solicitor. I trust by then, Your Grace. The title deployed like a weapon, aimed directly at both of them. You will have made arrangements. He let himself out. The front door closed behind him with a soft, final click. The quiet that followed was the wrong kind of quiet. Not the comfortable kind they had built slowly at dinner tables and across morning coffees. The kind that happens after something breaks. Clarissa walked to the window. She stood with her back to the room. She needed 10 seconds. She gave herself exactly 10. And then she turned around. "A duke," she said. "Yes." "Thornhaven." "Yes." "You told me your name was Westwood." "I did." He did not offer excuse or elaboration. He stood there and let the fact of what he had done occupy the full space of the room without softening it. "Why?" she said. "And I want the complete answer, not the piece of it, not the closed door. Everything." He pulled out the chair at the writing table and sat in it heavily. Not the controlled, deliberate way he usually occupied a seat, but the way a man sits when he is done holding himself up alone. He laced his fingers together on the desk in front of him and looked at them for a moment. 3 years ago, he said, my life in the North became untenable. Not because of Holt. Holt came later. Because of what the title had made of everything around me. Every person I encountered wanted something from the Duke of Thornhaven. My estate managers, my peers, the women my family suggested I court. My own cousin, who spent 4 years attempting to have me declared unfit for the title in order to claim it himself. He paused. I could not be in a room with another human being and be certain whether they were responding to me or to what I represented. I could not trust any person who knew my name. Clarissa watched him. She did not speak. I settled Holt's situation, or attempted to, and when it collapsed, I realized I had become exactly what I feared, a man whose title made him a target, and whose wealth made everyone around him a potential threat. I needed to step out of it. Entirely. Not forever. I never intended forever. Just long enough to... He stopped. Long enough to what? She asked. Long enough to remember what it felt like to be known as a man. He looked up at her. Virginia was practical. I had holdings here under a family name that predated the title. I could establish myself without the Duke's history preceding me. I intended to stay a year, resolve the legal situation with Holt, return north. A beat. And then your father sent word through a mutual contact that his daughter was unmarriageable, she said flatly. That his daughter was extraordinary, he said, specifically. That she was the most capable mind in the county, and that every man in it was too small for her, and that he was afraid for her future. Something went very tight inside Clarissa's chest. My father said that? She asked. In those words. She pressed her lips together hard and looked at the ceiling for one brief moment. Her father, who had sounded so tired and apologetic in that study. Her father, who had told Westwood, told the Duke, that she was extraordinary. She filed that away for later, when she had space to feel it. And so you came, she said, bringing herself back. I came, and I told myself it was practical. The household legitimacy, the business logic of it. All of that was true, but I... He stopped again. Then, I wanted to meet someone who would be exactly what she was, who would not shift based on what I was worth or what title I carried. His jaw worked. And I thought I had 1 year. I thought by the time it mattered, I would have resolved everything and told you, and it would be... He exhaled. I told myself it would be manageable. Manageable, she repeated. The word tasted of ash. You decided what I would need to know and when. You stood in front of me and let me make a vow to a man who did not exist. The vow was real, he said. I was real. You were not using your real name. Her voice cracked on the last word, not with tears, but with anger. The specific anger of a woman who had been fooled past her own best defenses. I told you before we ever signed a single paper. The one thing I would not tolerate. The one condition I placed above all others. I said I would not be deceived. I said I could respect a closed door. She pointed at him. That is not a closed door. That is a different house. He stood. Clarissa, do not, she stepped back. Do not explain it to me right now. I understand the logic of it. I am capable of understanding the logic of it. That is not what I need. What do you need? The question landed in the room, and she looked at him with the raw, unguarded frustration of someone who has been trying for 7 weeks to trust a man and has just discovered the floor was glass. I need 5 minutes, she said, to be furious. She walked out. She went to the kitchen because it was the farthest room from him, and because Mrs. Pruitt was not yet in, and she could be alone. She stood at the table and pressed both palms flat against the surface, and breathed. In. Out. In. The Duke of Thornhaven. The monogram on the silver. She had seen it and filed it away. The legal accounts in Philadelphia. The couriers from the north. The careful, controlled way he had managed every question she asked. Not lying, she realized now, not directly, but building a frame around the truth so that she could never quite see what was inside it. I am not deceiving you. I am asking for time. She had been so proud of herself for reading him, for seeing past the surface. She had believed she understood who he was, even without his history. She had told herself her instincts were sound. Her instincts had told her something was wrong since the first morning. She had chosen to give him a month. She stood in that kitchen, and she reckoned with the part she didn't want to reckon with. She had let herself feel something for him. She had let the crop rotation argument and the morning coffees and the way he said her name when no one else was listening start to matter more than she had agreed they would. She had made room for him in a chest she had kept locked for 26 years. And now she was standing with both hands on a kitchen table, trying to determine whether the man she had let in was the same man she had imagined, or simply a very convincing portrait of him. She heard his step in the hallway, deliberate, slower than usual, the step of a man who is not certain he will be welcome. I said 5 minutes, she said without turning. It has been 12, he said from the doorway. She almost laughed. She controlled it. Then I have been standing here longer than I thought. He came into the kitchen. He did not approach her. He leaned against the far wall and crossed his arms and looked at the floor. I have one question, she said. Only one, right now, and I need the truth. Ask it. She turned to face him. Is there anything else? Anything that you have not told me, not simply withheld, but actively arranged so that I would not see? Any other name, any other debt, any other part of your life that I will discover through someone like Percival Holt rather than from you? He met her eyes without blinking. No, he said. There is no other name. No other debt that Holt's. No other history I have hidden from you. The title, the Holt situation, the legal accounts. You have all of it now. He held her gaze. That is everything. She looked at him for a long time. She was measuring, the way she had always measured, the way she had measured the creditor letters in her father's drawer and the account books in his desk, and every word that Percival Holt had said, and every word he had not.
"I believe you," she said.
She could see what it cost him, the relief on his face, and she held up one hand before he could speak. "That does not mean I have forgiven you," she said. "It means I believe that specific answer. We are not the same place we were yesterday." "I know," he said. "I need to think." She turned back to the window. "About what this means. About what I want. About what I am going to do when your solicitor and Holt's solicitor sit across from each other in my dining room." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Our dining room." She looked at him sideways. "I am still furious, Nathaniel." "I know." A pause. "You called me Nathaniel." "That is apparently your name." "Yes," he said. "It is. That part was always real." She did not answer, but she did not ask him to leave either. He told her the rest of it that afternoon. Not in pieces, all of it, laid out in order, without softening and without editorializing. His father's death when Nathaniel was 19, the title coming to him before he was ready, the cousin, Edmund Ashby, who had spent a decade trying to prove incompetence, failure, anything that would unseat him. Holt appearing 3 years ago with a land transaction that had seemed like the solution to an eastern expansion problem and had turned out to be a calculated trap. The realization, at 32, that he could not tell a single person in his life whether they knew him or knew what he owned. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Your cousin," she said. "Edmund. Does he know you are here?" Something shifted in his face. "Not yet. But he will." "If Holt has found me," he paused. "Yes. Edmund will know eventually." She looked at him steadily. "Is he dangerous?" "To my title, yes. To my person." He stopped. "Edmund is not a man who acts directly. He works through other people's leverage. Like Holt." He held her gaze and said nothing, which was its own answer. She sat very still for a full 10 seconds. Then she said, "How long have you suspected that Holt and Edmund were connected?" The expression that moved across his face in that moment was the most complicated thing she had ever seen on a human face. A man confronted with proof of exactly how clearly his wife saw. 6 weeks, he said, since the second courier. "Before we were married," she said. "Yes." She stood up slowly. She walked to the window. She stood there with her back to him, and she thought about a man who had been hunted by his own cousin for a decade, who had come to Virginia to step out of his life, who had married a woman for practicality, and found himself telling her the truth across his own kitchen table at 2 p.m. on the worst day of his marriage. She thought about the way he had said, "You are my wife." More than I intended, more than I prepared for. She thought about what it meant to trust someone when every person you had ever trusted had turned out to be measuring what you were worth. She was still angry. She intended to stay angry for as long as it was honest to do so. But something else was moving underneath the anger. Something she had been calling nothing for 7 weeks. And it was pressing upward now with the same patient certainty as a seed in summer soil, and she could no longer in good conscience pretend it was not there. She turned around. "If Edmund is working through Holt," she said, "then the $12,000 debt is not the real problem." Nathaniel looked at her. "No," he said quietly, "it is not. He wants the title. He wants to discredit me publicly, demonstrate that the Duke of Thornhaven is hiding in Virginia under a false name, in debt, with no legitimate household. If Holt takes this to a public forum," he paused, "a man in my position, exposed this way, loses the standing necessary to defend the title legally. That is what Edmund is counting on." Clarissa looked at the man across the room, the Duke, her husband, the stranger who had argued about crop rotation on a Tuesday, and looked at her with relief in his eyes on a June morning, and carried something enormous and heavy for all 7 weeks she had known him. "Then we will not let him take it to a public forum," she said. Nathaniel went still. "Clarissa, I am angry with you," she said crisply. "I intend to remain angry with you for a reasonable amount of time. But I did not marry you to stand aside when someone comes at you with a manufactured debt and a cousin's agenda." She squared her shoulders. "I want the documentation of the land transaction. All of it. Every letter Holt sent you, every record of the original investment. And I want the name of your solicitor in Philadelphia." He stared at her. It was the first time she had seen him stare. Actually stare, without the managed composure, without the careful surface. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I am going to go through every paper in that transaction until I find what he falsified," she said. "Because men like Holt do not improvise. They build frameworks. And frameworks have seams." She looked at him directly. "Are you going to help me, or are you going to stand there looking surprised?" He was on his feet before the question finished, moving to the study, pulling the locked drawer she had noticed on her 3rd day in the house, setting a bound stack of correspondence on the desk. She sat down across from him, pulled the top letter from the stack, and began to read. He watched her for a moment in silence. "You are the most remarkable person I have ever met," he said. "You are still on my list," she said, without looking up. "Do not think a compliment resolves anything." "No, ma'am," he said, and he sat down, and they went to work. They worked through the night. Not because either of them decided to, but because the first letter led to the second, and the second to the third. And somewhere around midnight, Clarissa looked up from a document and said, "Holt dated this correspondence in March of 1817, but the land claim he references wasn't filed until June. He wrote the letter before the transaction existed." She set it down flat on the desk between them. "He fabricated the investment opportunity before he had anything to invest in. He built the framework first and filled it in after." Nathaniel stared at the letter. His face did something she had not seen it do before. It went from controlled to cold in a single beat. Not the comfortable stillness she had catalogued across 7 weeks. Something harder. The face of a man who had just confirmed the worst suspicion he'd spent 3 years living with. "He said it from the beginning," Nathaniel said. "From before the beginning." Clarissa pulled 2 more letters from the stack and lined them up. "Look at the handwriting on the signatures. This one," she pointed, "the ink weight is different. He signed these at separate times and backdated them to make the record appear continuous." She looked up. "Who witnessed these?" "A notary in Philadelphia, man named Greer." "Is Greer connected to Edmund?" Nathaniel was already on his feet. He crossed to the side drawer and pulled out a separate bound folder, the one she had noticed him reach for twice before and put back without opening in front of her. He opened it now without hesitation, handed her a page. It was a property record. Edmund Ashby's name was on the 3rd line. James Greer, notary, was on the 5th. Clarissa read it twice, set it down. "Your cousin and Holt's notary share a property interest in Lancaster County." Yes, Nathaniel said.
How long have you had this?
A pause. 4 months. She looked at him steadily. Before Virginia. Before Virginia. She processed that. You came here knowing Edmund had a hand in the Holt arrangement. I came here knowing Edmund was involved in something I couldn't yet prove, and that if I stayed in the North, I would be managing an attack I couldn't see coming. Virginia gave me distance and time to build the case. He met her eyes without flinching. I know what you are about to say. Then you know that you withheld information again, she said. Not loudly. She was past loud. Not to protect me, to protect the case. Yes, he said. Both. The honest answer, she said, is that you did not trust me with it. He was quiet for a long, honest moment. The honest answer, he said, is that I did not yet know whether to trust anyone. That includes you, at the beginning. He held her gaze. It does not include you now. She looked at him. The exhaustion of the night sat in the lines of his face. The careful, self-contained man she had married looked, at this particular hour, like someone who had been carrying a house on his shoulders for 3 years, and had finally set it down far enough away to breathe. She picked up the next letter. Then let's finish this, she said. Trust me now. By 4 a.m, they had built something that was not yet a legal case, but was the bones of one. Dates misaligned, witnesses shared between parties who should have been strangers, a notary whose name appeared in Edmund Ashby's property records 3 separate times. Clarissa organized it into a sequence so clear that even a judge who had no interest in helping them would have difficulty looking away from it. Nathaniel watched her work and said nothing, which was the most useful thing he could have done. When she finally set down the last letter and rubbed her eyes with the heel of her hand, he said quietly, "You should sleep." "So should you." "I will." He paused. "Clarissa, when this is resolved, all of it, I intend to tell you everything. Not because you've demanded it, because I want to." He held her gaze across the desk. "I want you to know who I am, the full picture, not the version I carry in public." She looked at him in the low light. The exhausted, real, entirely unmanaged version of his face. She thought about her fourth condition, about closed doors and painted walls, about the difference between a man who cannot bring himself to be honest and a man who has learned, for survival's sake, to be strategic with the truth. Those were different things. She had spent the last 12 hours understanding which one she was dealing with. "I know who you are," she said. And then, because she was Clarissa Ashford, and she did not say things she did not mean, "That does not mean I am finished being angry." "I know," he said. "Good night, Nathaniel." "Good night, Clarissa." Holt arrived 6 days later with his solicitor, a thin, paper-colored man named Everett Rand, who carried a leather satchel and the practiced expression of a man who believed every room he entered was already won. Nathaniel's solicitor, James Whitmore, had ridden from Philadelphia in 4 days flat at Clarissa's letter, and sat across the dining room table with the collected correspondence, organized and annotated in her hand, stacked in front of him. Clarissa sat at the head of the table. It was not a seat anyone had assigned her. She had simply sat there, and no one had suggested otherwise. Holt looked at her with a reassessing expression she was becoming accustomed to from men who had not expected her to be where she was. "Mrs. Westwood," he said, "I had not anticipated you would be present for this discussion." "I manage the household accounts of Thornfield," she said. "Any financial arrangement affecting this household falls within my oversight. Sit down, Mr. Holt." He sat. The smile was in place, but thinner now, a practice tool being asked to perform under conditions it hadn't been designed for. Rand opened his satchel with the deliberate efficiency of a man establishing authority. "I have here the record of debt as filed with a court of—" "Before you continue," Clarissa said, "I would like to address the date discrepancy in your primary correspondence." Rand stopped. Holt's hand on the table went very still. "The initial letter of agreement," she laid it in front of Rand, "is dated March 14th, 1817. The land claim it references, second letter placed beside it, was not filed with the Pennsylvania Land Office until June 3rd, 1817. Which means Mr. Holt represented an investment opportunity in a property transaction that did not yet legally exist." Silence. "Furthermore," third document, "the notary who witnessed both party signatures, one James Greer, holds a shared property interest in Lancaster County with Mr. Edmund Ashby." She looked at Holt directly. "Mr. Edmund Ashby, who is, as I understand it, the Duke of Thornhaven's cousin, and the individual with the most material interest in discrediting the current Duke's standing." Holt's smile was entirely gone. Rand was looking at the documents in front of him, with the expression of a man discovering the building he is standing in has no foundation. "This," Rand began, "is fraud," Clarissa said. "Specifically, a manufactured debt predicated on a fabricated investment, witnessed by a notary with direct financial ties to the party most motivated to see the debt used against my husband." She folded her hands on the table. "My husband acted in good faith on representations Mr. Holt made knowingly and falsely. The debt is not legally binding. And if Mr. Holt wishes to dispute that position in a public courtroom," she paused, "we are prepared to present every document in this stack, including the property record connecting Mr. Greer to Mr. Edmund Ashby." The room was absolutely silent. Then Holt said, very carefully, "You cannot prove that Edmund Ashby directed—" "We don't need to prove direction," Nathaniel said from the far end of the table. It was the first time he had spoken since the meeting began. His voice was steady and precise, and left no room for negotiation. "We need to demonstrate the shared financial interest and the documentary fraud. A court will draw its own conclusions." Holt looked at him. Something was happening behind the man's eyes. The rapid, ugly arithmetic of a man calculating whether the position he came in holding could be salvaged. 20 minutes, Rand said quietly to Holt. "I need 20 minutes. They stepped out. Clarissa sat at the head of her table and did not look at Nathaniel, because if she looked at him right now, she was not certain she could maintain the particular expression that the situation required. Whitmore leaned over and said, just above a whisper, "Mrs. Westwood, in 20 years of practice, I have never seen a private party build a fraud case of this quality without legal training. I read everything I can get my hands on," she said. "I have been told it is a problem." Nathaniel made a sound across the table. She kept her eyes on the window, but she felt it, warm and specific, settle somewhere in her chest. Holt and Rand returned in 17 minutes. The smile was gone entirely. Rand did the talking. "My client is prepared to withdraw the claim," Rand said, with the stripped-down efficiency of a man cutting his losses, "in exchange for a mutual agreement of confidentiality regarding the documentation you have assembled." "No," Clarissa said. Rand blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "The withdrawal, yes. The confidentiality agreement? No." She kept her voice entirely pleasant. "The documentation connecting Mr. Greer to Mr. Edmund Ashby is a matter my husband intends to pursue through proper legal channels, not for public disclosure, but for protection. If Mr. Holt withdraws the claim and refrains from any further action against this household or the Thornhaven title, the assembled case will remain in our solicitor's possession and be used only if provoked." She looked at Holt directly. Mr. Holt is a practical man. I am certain he understands the value of that arrangement." Holt looked at her for a long moment. She held his gaze without shifting. "Agreed," he said. He left without shaking anyone's hand. The moment the front door closed, Whitmore began consolidating his papers with the brisk efficiency of a satisfied man. Clarissa remained seated until he had packed his satchel and excused himself to the guest room to rest before his return journey. Then the dining room was empty, except for the two of them, and the stack of documents between them, and the particular silence that follows the end of something that had been coming for a long time. Nathaniel looked at her across the table. "You should have been a solicitor," he said. "Women are not permitted to be solicitors. That is the legal system's most significant failing." She gathered the documents into a neat stack and did not answer, because she was doing the other thing. The thing she always had to fight through after a long, sustained effort. Coming down from the concentration of it, and landing back in the reality of where she was, and who she was sitting across from, and what had not yet been resolved between them. "Edmund," she said, "the claim is gone, but Edmund is not." "No," Nathaniel said. "Edmund is not." "He will find another approach." "He always does." She looked at him steadily. "Then we need to remove the leverage." She paused. "The Duke of Thornhaven cannot continue to be a rumor in Virginia. If your identity and your household are publicly established, legitimately, openly, Edmund loses the ability to use disclosure as a weapon." Nathaniel studied her. "You are suggesting we go public." "I am suggesting," she said, "that we stop hiding what we are. You are a duke with a legitimate household and a wife, and a documented case of fraud against the man your cousin sent to ruin you. That is not a position you defend from the shadows." She held his gaze. "That is a position you walk into the light with." He was quiet for a moment. "If we do that," he said carefully, "this county will know who you married. They will know the arrangement. They will say what they have always said about me," she said, "that I am difficult, proud, unmarriageable, that no decent man would have me, and the one who did was hiding something." She looked at him levelly. "Let them say it. They have been saying it for 26 years. It has not killed me yet." Something moved across his face, raw and fast, and not at all controlled. "Clarissa, I am not doing this for sentiment," she said firmly. "I am doing it because it is the correct tactical decision, and because I made a vow to you in my father's parlor, and I intend to honor it." She paused, then, quieter, "And because you were right. The vow was real. Whatever your name was when you spoke it, the man who spoke it was real. I believe that." Another pause. "I am still angry." "I know," he said. "But I am also—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. This part was harder. This was the part she had been pushing down since the kitchen on the morning Holt walked into her house. "I am also not going to pretend that 7 weeks of living alongside someone leaves nothing behind, even when you are furious with them." She looked at the table. "I am not good at this. The feeling part." "You are better at it than you think," he said quietly. She looked up at him. He was watching her with the same expression she had first seen on their wedding day. The relief. But fuller now, more complicated. Something that had been relief was becoming something else, and she could see it, and she knew he could see her seeing it. "We have a social call to make," she said. She stood, smoothed her dress, and moved to the door with both hands entirely steady. "Mrs. Hargrove is hosting a gathering Friday evening. I believe we should attend. You want to walk into Eleanor Hargrove's parlor as the Duke and Duchess of Thornhaven.
"I want to walk in as Nathaniel and Clarissa Ashby," she said. "The title can follow us through the door on its own."
He stood, and then he did something she had not seen him do. He smiled. Not the controlled, almost not quite movement she had catalogued before. A full, unguarded, entirely real smile that changed the whole composition of his face. It nearly knocked her sideways. She refused to let it show. "Friday," he said. "Friday," she confirmed, and walked out before he could see what was happening to her expression. The days between were the strangest of their marriage. The Holt pressure was gone. The locked drawer was open. Everything that had been managed and kept behind careful surface had been brought into the room and named, and what remained between them was different. Not easier necessarily, but real in a way that was entirely new. He found her Thursday morning in the front room with Edmund Ashby's property records spread across the side table, cross-referencing them against a map of Pennsylvania land districts she had borrowed from Whitmore before he left. "You are building a secondary case," he said from the doorway. "I am building a complete one," she said without looking up. "Holt was the first move. Edmund will make a second. I intend to be ready before he does." He came into the room and looked at the map. "You marked 3 properties. All registered within 2 years of your father's death. All in regions adjacent to Thornhaven's primary holdings." She looked up. "Edmund has been acquiring land that would consolidate into a competing estate if the title transferred. He is not trying to claim Thornhaven. He is trying to make himself so well positioned that when the title is disputed and you are discredited, he can step into the regional authority regardless of whether the title formally transfers." Nathaniel looked at the map, at the 3 marked properties, at the woman who had been sitting in his front room for 3 days, building a case against his cousin's long-game strategy with a borrowed map and her own considerable mind. "My legal team in Philadelphia has been working on Edmund for a year," he said. "How far have they gotten?" A pause. "Not this far." She looked at him, held the gaze for one deliberate moment, then went back to the map. "Send them what I have, and tell them to look at the timing of the land registrations in relation to the dates on Holt's backdated correspondence." I think Edmund was managing both tracks simultaneously, using Holt to create the financial pressure while quietly building the property position in the north. She traced the map with one finger. He needed both to work. If Holt's debt held, your public discrediting would have followed quickly. Edmund would already be in position. "If Holt's debt had held," Nathaniel said slowly, "and it had gone to a public proceeding, you would have been exposed as living under a false name, in debt, with no credible defense, while your cousin held 3 properties worth more than most men in this county see in a lifetime." She looked up. That was the whole plan. The room went very quiet. "He would have had everything," Nathaniel said. Not loudly. The way a man says something when he is genuinely confronting the size of it for the first time. "He nearly did," Clarissa said. "Except Percival Holt is the kind of man who cannot resist building a framework. And frameworks have seams." She set her pen down and looked at him directly. "You should have told me all of this in June." "Yes," he said, no hesitation. "I should have. We would have moved faster." "Yes, we would have." She held his gaze. "I need you to understand something, Nathaniel. Not as your wife, as your partner in this. I am not a woman who needs to be managed. I am not a woman who requires careful handling, or selective information, or decisions made on my behalf about what I can absorb." Her voice was clear and direct, and entirely without heat. "If you treat me as someone to be protected from information rather than trusted with it, we will fail. Not at the legal case. At this." She gestured between them.
All of this. He looked at her for a long, unguarded moment. "I understand," he said. "Do you?" Clarissa. He said her name with the particular weight it had been accumulating across 8 weeks of mornings and arguments and a night bent over forged documents and an afternoon at the head of a table she had claimed without asking. "I have never in my life met another person who made me want to be more honest than I had decided to be." He paused. "That is not a comfortable experience, but it is—" He stopped. "It is what?" she asked. "It is the first thing in 3 years that has felt like solid ground," he said. The room held very still. She looked at him, this man who had come into her father's study with a business proposition and had become, without either of their permission, something entirely different. And she felt the thing she had been refusing to name since the wedding day press up through the floor of her chest like water through limestone. Patient, certain, entirely unstoppable. She picked up her pen. "Then stand on it," she said. "And stop keeping secrets." "No more secrets," he said. She wrote another note on the margin of the map. "Good. Now come look at this third property. Something about the registration date is wrong, and I cannot tell yet whether it is Edmund's error or mine." He pulled up the chair beside her and leaned over the map, and his shoulder was an inch from hers, and she did not move away, and he did not either. And they sat like that for 2 hours, going through Edmund Ashby's property records, while the Virginia afternoon moved through the windows unhurried and entirely unaware that something in that room had shifted permanently on its axis. Friday came with the specific clarity of a late July morning that has burned the haze off early and left the sky clean and hard and certain. Clarissa dressed in deep green, her best dress, the one she had worn exactly twice in 3 years because she had no occasion that merited it, and came downstairs to find Nathaniel already in the front hall in a coat she had not seen before. Dark blue, well cut, with nothing performative about it. He looked like what he was, not a country gentleman borrowing a name. A man who had come back to himself. He looked at her and did not speak for a moment. "Don't," she said. "I haven't said anything." "You were about to say something that would make this more complicated than it needs to be." "I was going to say you look—" "I know what I look like," she said. "Are we going?" "We are going," he said. She walked past him to the door, and he reached it before her and opened it, and she went through it without looking at him, and they walked to Mrs. Hargrove's evening gathering side by side in the clear July air, and she was fully aware of every inch of distance between them, and the way it kept closing by small degrees with every step, and the fact that she did not adjust it. Eleanor Hargrove's gathering was exactly what Clarissa had expected. 20 people in a well-appointed parlor, performing the careful social work of a county that had spent 2 months constructing theories about the Westwood household. The conversation stopped, all of it, at once, when they came through the door. 20 pairs of eyes, 20 separate calculations. Clarissa felt the weight of it like a physical thing. She had felt it all her life. It had never stopped being heavy. She had simply gotten very good at not letting that show. Mrs. Hargrove appeared with the expression of a woman who had planned for several scenarios and was rapidly determining which one had arrived. "Mrs. Westwood," she said, "and Mr. Westwood. What a surprise." "Ashby," Nathaniel said. Mrs. Hargrove blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "Nathaniel Ashby," he said. "I have been conducting personal affairs under a family name for the past year. I apologize for any confusion it may have caused." He paused, and his voice was entirely level, entirely clear, entirely unapologetic, in the way that only a man who has decided to stop managing his own exposure can sound. "The full name is Nathaniel Harland Ashby. Duke of Thornhaven. My wife is the Duchess." The room went absolutely, completely still. Clarissa watched 20 people absorb that information and felt something she had not expected. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Something quieter. The specific private peace of a woman who has fought for every inch of ground she is standing on, and has finally, at 26 years old, got both feet planted on something that will not move. Mrs. Hargrove's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "A duke," she said finally. "Yes," Clarissa said pleasantly. "He is." She let exactly one beat pass. "Would you like to take our coats?" Mrs. Hargrove took their coats. That was, Clarissa decided later, the most satisfying moment of the entire evening. Watching Eleanor Hargrove, who had presided over the social architecture of this county for 20 years, stand in her own parlor, holding 2 coats, and not one single prepared response. The gathering recovered itself within 10 minutes, as gatherings do, because people are fundamentally curious, and curiosity will always defeat shock eventually. By the end of the first hour, 3 different women had found reasons to position themselves near Clarissa. Not with the sideways approach of women circling someone they pitied, but the direct, attentive approach of women who had just recalibrated an entire calculation and were not too proud to show it. Miss Dalton, of all people, found her near the window and said, in a voice stripped of its usual performance, "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Westwood. Several of them." Clarissa looked at her. The girl was young, 20 at most. She had been following Mrs. Hargrove's lead for so long that she probably no longer knew what her own opinions felt like. Clarissa knew that particular condition intimately. "Consider them received," Clarissa said, "and accepted." Miss Dalton exhaled. "You are not what I expected." "I know," Clarissa said. "Neither is he." She glanced across the room to where Nathaniel stood talking to Judge Calvert with the ease of a man who has stopped pretending to be smaller than he is. "He is better than I expected, actually. That surprised me more than anything." Miss Dalton followed her gaze, looked back at Clarissa. Something in her expression went soft and young and entirely honest. "Are you happy?" It was such a direct question, the kind only the very young or the very brave ask. Clarissa considered it genuinely, the way she considered everything, without sentiment, without the answer she was supposed to give. "I am something," she said. "I am not yet certain it has a name, but it is considerable." They rode home past midnight, with the Virginia summer still heavy in the air, and neither of them spoke for the first half of the journey. Not uncomfortably, the way people are quiet when they have been in the same battle and are still inside the residue of it. Then Nathaniel said, "Calvert knew my father." Clarissa looked at him. "Judge Calvert?" "They studied law together in Philadelphia before my father inherited the title. Calvert came south 30 years ago and never went back." A pause. "He asked how the North looked these days. He said he missed it sometimes." "What did you tell him?" "I told him the North looked exactly as he probably remembered it, and that Virginia was considerably warmer in every sense of the word." He kept his eyes on the road. He laughed. "He said my father used to say something similar." She watched his profile in the dark. "You miss him?" "Every day," he said simply. Not with grief's performance, with the plain, quiet acknowledgement of a loss that has been lived with long enough to become part of the landscape. "He was the one person who knew exactly what I was and required nothing from it. When he died, everyone who remained wanted something." A pause. "I forgot what it felt like to simply be known." She thought about what he had said weeks ago across the kitchen table. I wanted to meet someone who would be exactly what she was. She thought about her father's words, extraordinary, and the particular, unexpected grief of a man who had described his daughter clearly to a stranger, because there was no one left in his own house to describe her to. "You are known now," she said. He looked at her, just briefly, then back at the road. "Yes," he said, "I am." They rode the rest of the way home in that particular quiet that is not the absence of something, but the presence of it, settled, unhurried, entirely real. Edmund Ashby arrived in Virginia 4 days later. Clarissa found out the way she found out most things that mattered. Not from Nathaniel, who received the courier's message at breakfast and said nothing, but from the particular controlled stillness that came over his face when he read it, and that she had learned, across 9 weeks of living alongside him, to read like weather. "Edmund," she said, not a question. He looked up from the letter. "He is in Charlottesville. He will be here by Thursday." "How did he find out so quickly?" "Holt," he said. "Or someone in this county who wrote north after the Hargrove gathering." His jaw worked. "Possibly both." He set the letter down. "Clarissa, I need you to—" "To what?" she said, evenly, with both hands on her coffee cup and her eyes on his face. He stopped, looked at her. "I was going to say, I need you to be prepared," he said. "Not to stay out of it. To be prepared. Edmund is— He is not Holt. He is considerably more intelligent and considerably more willing to make things personal." "Let him," she said. "You have not met him." "No," she said, "but I have read 4 months of his property records and 3 years of his legal maneuvering, and I know exactly what kind of man he is." She picked up her coffee. "The kind who is very good when no one is watching, and very poor when someone is." She met Nathaniel's eyes. "He has never dealt with someone who is watching." Nathaniel looked at her across the breakfast table for a long moment. "No," he said quietly. "He has not." Edmund Ashby was nothing like what she had built in her mind, which was, she supposed, the first of his advantages. She had expected cold. She got charm. She had expected aggression. She got warmth, the specific, polished, slightly too perfect warmth of a man who had been performing it for so long that he had lost track of where the performance ended. He arrived Thursday afternoon and shook Nathaniel's hand with both of his and said, "Cousin, you look well. Virginia agrees with you," and smiled like a man genuinely delighted to see family. Then he turned to Clarissa and said, "And this must be the remarkable Mrs. Ashby. Forgive me, Your Grace. I have heard a great deal about you." And his smile aimed at her like something calibrated. "Mr. Ashby," she said, "please come in." She showed him to the sitting room. She poured tea. She was the picture of gracious hospitality, and she watched him watch her decide what she was, and she let him underestimate. She was good at that. She had been practicing it her whole life. Edmund sat with the ease of a man who has never once entered a room and not controlled it. He looked around Thornfield, at the well-kept order of it, the quiet evidence of a managed household. And she saw the flicker of recalculation behind his pleasant eyes. "I'll be honest," Edmund said. "I came because I was concerned. When Holt's man sent word that my cousin had been discovered, I was alarmed. Nathaniel has always been a private man. I hope to offer whatever family support might be useful." "That is very generous," Clarissa said. "Given that Mr. Holt was operating with your notary's assistance." The room went very still. Edmund's smile did not break, but something behind it did. just slightly, just at the edges. The hairline crack of a man who has stepped onto ground he did not know was hollow. "I'm not certain what you mean," he said. "James Greer," she said pleasantly. "Notary. He witnessed the investment documents Mr. Holt used to establish my husband's debt. Mr. Greer also appears on the registration of 3 properties in Lancaster County that you acquired in the 2 years following your uncle's death." She tilted her head. "It is an interesting overlap." Edmund looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked back at him with an expression that had nothing manageable in it. "Property records are public," Edmund said. His voice had not changed. She gave him credit for that. "A shared notary is coincidence." "The dates are not coincidence," she said. "Mr. Holt's correspondence, which I have read in full, references a land claim before that claim was legally filed. The letters were backdated, which means Mr. Holt constructed a fraudulent investment record and used Mr. Greer to notarize documents that supported a debt that was never legitimate." She kept her voice entirely even. "A debt that, if it had held in a public proceeding, would have positioned you to petition for the title on grounds of incompetence or disrepute." She set her teacup down carefully. "Is that the family support you came to offer, Mr. Ashby?" Edmund was quiet for 4 full seconds. She counted them. Then he did something she had not anticipated. He laughed. Genuinely, or close enough to it that the difference was immaterial. "Nathaniel," he said, "where in God's name did you find her?" "Virginia," Nathaniel said. "You should have come here years ago." Edmund shook his head slowly. The charm had shifted, not gone, but repositioned. She watched him decide to try a different approach. "Mrs. Ashby, you are clearly a woman of extraordinary intelligence, and I admire what you have built here, truly. But you are working from documents. Documents can be explained. The picture you are describing is a serious accusation against a man of my standing, and without considerably more than a notary's name appearing twice in public records. 6 times, she said. He stopped. Mr. Greer's name appears in connection with your property interests 6 times across 4 counties, she said. I found 3 initially. Our solicitor, Mr. Whitmore, found the remaining 3 in records you filed during the period when Holt was actively pursuing my husband. The timing is, she paused, instructive. Edmund's jaw was a degree tighter than it had been. We are not planning a public accusation, Nathaniel said from the doorway. He had stood through the whole of it, and now he crossed the room and stood beside Clarissa. Not in front of her. Beside her. We are planning a conversation between family members about the disposition of certain property interests that would make it considerably cleaner for you to withdraw from any further involvement in Thornhaven's affairs. Edmund looked at both of them. Then something in his face did the thing she had read about in his history and had not fully believed until she saw it. The mask of a man who was calculating not just this move, but 12 ahead of it. And if I decline the conversation? Edmund said. Then everything Whitmore has goes to the Pennsylvania courts, and we let the dates speak for themselves, Clarissa said. You are a man of standing, Mr. Ashby. I imagine standing is something you prefer to protect. A very long silence. Then Edmund Ashby set down his teacup, stood, straightened his coat, and said, You are wasted in Virginia, Your Grace. He looked at Nathaniel. She is wasted in Virginia. She is exactly where she belongs, Nathaniel said. Edmund nodded once. He walked to the door. At the threshold, he stopped and turned back, and for just a moment the charm and the calculation were both gone, and there was simply a man who had spent a decade reaching for something and had come up short. Not because the ground had failed him, but because he had not accounted for this particular variable. I will need 30 days, he said, to arrange the withdrawal of certain interests. 30 days, Nathaniel confirmed.
Edmund left. The front door had been closed for perhaps 20 seconds before Clarissa sat down in the nearest chair and pressed both hands flat on her knees and breathed. Nathaniel crouched in front of her. "Are you all right?" "I am perfectly fine," she said. "I simply need a moment to stop being composed." "Take as long as you need." "I thought he was going to push back harder," she said. "I had 4 more points prepared." "You had 4 more points." "I always have more points." She looked at him. He was very close, crouched at her level, watching her with that expression she had stopped trying to categorize because she had run out of neutral names for it. "He is going to honor the 30 days?" "Yes," Nathaniel said. "Edmund is a great many things. A man who accepts a lost position and reorganizes is one of them. It is part of what makes him dangerous." A pause. "It is also, in this instance, what is going to make him manageable." "And after 30 days?" "After 30 days, the property interests that gave him leverage adjacent to Thornhaven will be restructured. He will still be my cousin. He will always be my cousin." His voice was measured. "But he will no longer be a threat to the title or to this household." She looked at him. This close, in this particular afternoon light, he looked nothing like the stranger who had sat in her father's study and offered a bloodless arrangement. He looked like a man who had traveled a very great distance to arrive at something he had not expected to find. "Nathaniel," she said. "Yes. I am finished being angry." He went very still. "I have been thinking about when that moment would arrive," she said, "and I believe this is it. Not because I have forgotten what you withheld. I have not, and I will not. It is part of what I know about you now, and it informs what I will expect going forward." She held his gaze directly. "But I am a practical woman. I deal in what is true. And what is true is that you could have used the month I gave you to finish managing your affairs and left me out of it entirely. You did not. When it became impossible to keep me out, you told me everything. All of it, without softening. And everything you told me, you have since backed with evidence." She paused. "I do not stay angry past the point where it is honest to do so. It is no longer honest." He looked at her for a moment that had nothing managed in it. "What is honest?" he asked quietly. She took a breath. She had been building to this for 9 weeks, and she was not going to make it smaller than it was by rushing it. "That I did not expect you," she said. "I went into this agreement fully prepared to honor its terms, and nothing more. I did not expect the crop rotation argument, or the way you pour your own coffee, or the look on your face when you think no one is watching you read a letter from home." Her voice was steady. "I did not expect to feel whatever this is. It is not convenient. It is not small. And I am not going to name it incorrectly by choosing a word that is less than it is." She looked at him. "I am not sentimental. I told myself that repeatedly. But I believe sentiment and clarity can coexist in the same chest. And I believe that is what I have been carrying since June." He reached out and took her hand. Not gently, firmly, the way he did everything, with the deliberate certainty of a man who has decided and is not retreating. "Clarissa," he said, "I came to Virginia to step outside my life, to remember what solid ground felt like. I told myself this arrangement was practical." He held her hand and looked at her with the full, undisguised weight of 9 weeks of mornings and arguments and a night over forged documents and a dining room table where she had taken the chair at the head and dismantled a man's fraudulent case with the composure of someone who had been built for exactly this. "There is nothing practical about what I feel for you. It is the most inconvenient, unanticipated, entirely real thing that has happened to me in 11 years of managing this title and everything attached to it." His jaw worked. I love you. That is the complete answer. She looked at him, the man she had agreed to marry for practicality. The Duke who had walked into her father's study without a name she could verify and had somehow, across 9 improbable weeks, become the only person in her world who had never once tried to make her smaller. I know, she said. He blinked. You know? I have been watching you since June, she said. I am a very observant person. I noticed. The corner of her mouth moved. I also love you. That is my complete answer. He pulled her forward and kissed her. Not careful, not managed, not performed. Entirely real. The kind of kiss that belongs to people who have been circling the truth for a long time and have finally arrived at it without apology. When she pulled back, she kept hold of his hand and said, I want to go north. He blinked again. She was finding she enjoyed that, the moments when she genuinely surprised him. To Thornhaven? Edmund will be reorganizing his position. Your legal team is in Philadelphia. Your estate is in the north. She looked at him steadily. This is my household, and I will not abandon it. But Thornhaven is also my household now, and I want to see it. I want to understand the full picture of what we are managing. A pause. And I want to meet your solicitors in person, because I have suggestions. He stared at her. You have suggestions. Several. Whitmore is thorough, but slow. The documentation strategy should shift now that Edmund has been confronted directly. We need to move from defense to position, which requires... Clarissa. Yes? We can discuss strategy tomorrow. She looked at him. He was smiling again. That full, unguarded, entirely real smile that still did something inconvenient to her chest every time it appeared. She had stopped fighting that particular reaction approximately 4 days ago. Fine, she said. Tomorrow. She wrote to her father that evening. Not a long letter. She had never been a woman who used length where precision would serve better. She told him that Thornfield was well, that the household was established, that the man he had sent her to had turned out to be considerably more than a country gentleman, and that she intended to make something of that fact. She told him that Mabel and Francis were welcome to visit in September. She told him that she had read his description of her, the one he had given to Nathaniel before they met, and that she wished he had said it to her directly, and that she forgave him for every year he had not. She sealed the letter and sat for a moment with her hands on the table. She thought about the woman who had pressed herself against the parlor wall in June and listened to her own name spoken like an apology. She thought about how quiet and careful she had become, how many years she had spent absorbing everything aimed at her and revealing nothing in return, because revelation was risk, and risk had never felt like something she could afford. She thought about what it had cost her, all of it, and what it had given her back. Nathaniel knocked twice and appeared in the doorway. He had a letter in his hand. Whitmore, he said. The Lancaster records have been formally flagged. The withdrawal timeline is locked. He paused. It is done. She looked at him across the room. Her husband, the Duke, the man who poured his own coffee and argued about crop rotation on Tuesdays and had stood beside her, not in front of her, when Edmund Ashby sat in her parlor and tried to manage them both. Then we go north next week, she said. Next week, he agreed. She stood, crossed to the door, stopped in front of him. Nathaniel? Yes? When we are at Thornhaven, she said, I want you to show me the library. He looked at her. It is extensive. I assumed it would be. It will take you years to get through it. I know, she said. The smile came back, slow and certain and entirely real. Then it appears, he said, that you intend to stay a while. I intend to stay permanently, she said. I told you in June.
I honor my vows. All of them." She looked at him with the same direct clarity she had aimed at every hard thing across 26 years of learning not to look away. "Including the one I made to a man whose name I did not fully know, in a parlor with 4 witnesses on the last Saturday of June." He took her face in both hands the way a man does when he is done being careful. "Clarissa Ashby," he said. "That is my name," she said. He kissed her again, and she let him, and the Virginia summer settled warm and final around Thornfield, around this house that had been a secret and was now simply a home. And the woman who had been pressed against a wall, listening to her own father call her unmarriageable, stood in the arms of the man who had come looking for her specifically. And she was not small, and she was not managed, and she was not alone. She was exactly where she had always been capable of being. It had simply taken the right person to stand beside her and let her prove it. Clarissa Ashford had been told her whole life she was too much. It turned out she was precisely enough. And the man who understood that was a duke, and he was hers. And that was the whole of it. Settled and unshakable. As solid as Virginia limestone, and twice as lasting.